Hello, my name's Simon Crafar and we're in the WP truck for this week's Tech Talk, not TikTok. So we're going to look at front forks, and I want to explain that front fork, the damping system is very similar, more or less the same as a rear shock. So if you want to know exactly what's going on inside, watch the rear shock Tech Talk we did Valencia last year. So when I say it's very similar, this is the damping system that goes inside the fork, and it has, just like the rear shock, a piston with shim stack on there that's completely adjustable to get that damping curve and change it. It has oil inside, it's sealed just like the rear shock, and it also has a top out spring, you know. So this piston's sliding up and down on the end of this rod inside, top out spring in there. I was around in the 90s when these top out springs came out, and it allowed you to put extra preload on, and it doesn't, the front tyre hard on the gas doesn't lose contact with the ground as much and get those head shakes. So I love these things, they were a great invention. So that sealed unit is like a rear shock. Think of it like that. We'll put over here, and the difference really comes because that goes inside the inner and outer tube. And I think the first thing to talk about the inner and outer tube is these guys work very hard on the friction side because that has to run really smoothly. Imagine the force that's going in here when they're on the brakes, and if it doesn't run smooth, it's got a top and a bottom bush, and that surface has to run on this surface. If you've got braking really hard, a lot of force in here, doesn't run smoothly on there, the fork isn't going to work nice and smoothly over the bumps. And the way they do this is, for example, when I was working with the suspension, this thing here would turn up from production and look beautiful and smooth, whether it's, well, doesn't matter what color it is, black, gold, silver, but under a microscope it looks more like sandpaper, you know. So the guys polish it to the point where even under a microscope it's super smooth, and then runs super smooth on the two bushes. The other thing is the seal that keeps that oil in there, you know, the oil that you're going to see later on, not the oil in the cartridge, but the oil in the outer tube. It keeps it in here. That they work very hard on, coatings and how hard those little springs inside the seal on here. It has to run to keep the friction low. And then you're not only talking about this friction here. As you lean over, the bumps are going this way, so you're talking about the forces, I gather it's lateral forces on that inner and outer tube. And as the WP guys have explained to me, this is now considered part of the chassis, you know, because the chassis stiffness is super important, so is the forks, and they work together for the rider to feel to that front tyre. And so that is adjustable on how strong that inner tube is, always, and the outer tube, and triple clamps that hold, you know, how strong they are that hold this fork. A new development in the last 10 years, well, after I've been riding at a good level, is these fork bottoms. You know, in my day they were a solid block, pretty ugly. There were lots of strength just to be safe. But in the last decade, there's been a big improvement on basically calculations on where to remove aluminium to make it strong, safe, but strong in the exact. Everything there has been calculated to work, you know, for braking, for stiffness, and apparently, you know, this is obviously lots lighter, so there's an advantage on that. It's strong for safety, but also feel for the rider to work together with all this and the chassis. Apparently hard on the brakes, that last moment into the corner where they release the brake, the rider can feel the difference between this and the big old solid block. So super cool technology wise. So now we've seen inner outer tube cartridge. We're going to get Gerald to put this together for us. Gerald, can you do that for us? So the cartridge, sealed cartridge, just like a rear shock has. It drops in, he's going to tighten it up. So basically it's clamping that cartridge to the fork bottom and the inner tube. It's all one piece now once that's in. And then once that goes in, Gerald's going to put the compression adjuster in the bottom. This is just like the street bikes have. Your street bike will have something similar. Actually, a lot of the street bikes now have the cartridges on the inner, so this is all really similar to the road stuff that goes in. So now that cartridge is connected to the compression damping adjuster here, clicker. And next, we're going to do oil level. And like, look how, in my day back in a motorcycle shop working on farm bikes, you just measure out, look in the book, take so many 100 mils, drop it in. But the oil level is critical. The riders feel that because the higher the oil level is, basically this is adjusting air gap. The higher it is, the less air gap you have. And when you're hard on the brakes, when it gets to the bottom, the forks get stiffer sooner. The lower it is, the more linear the forks feel. So that's another adjustment. And we'd just, on the farm bikes, drop the oil in. Now, then when I got onto the racing bikes, I would muck around, tipping it out and try and get it at the right level. But with these later tools, they've been out for a while now, you can just set that to, what's that, 180 mil air gap, tip a little bit more than that oil level in, push the cartridge down, and now Gerald's going to suck out the excess. Oh, Gerald, we need some more in there. Basically, you've got how it works. So that now is exact to the millimeter, 180 mil, if you had a little bit more oil in. So next up, we're going to put a spring in here. Front fork spring drops into that oil. That's why you need to measure without the oil, the spring in, because that oil level would have gone up with a spring in there. Fork cap on top. And that's bolted now. The fork cap, the spring, cartridge, fork bottom, all bolted together. Tightened up, and we can close it. Look at that. And once it's closed, it's ready to go into the motorcycle. Hey, I've got to tell you, Gerald is the man who works with Brad Binder. Last weekend, White Power, sorry, WP, that's the old name. WP, Gerald, I've got to say a big shout out, and Brad of course, won their first MotoGP with this beautiful piece of equipment. Thanks, Gerald.
You're welcome.
See you next week for the next Tech Talk.